Marion also mentioned adult protective services, and we're really lucky to have up next our adult protective services presentation. Chantal Williams, she's the Centralized Intake Director. And so you're up, Chantal. Thank you for your time today, and we all look forward to your informative presentation.
Good morning. Thank you for that introduction, Catherine. Good morning to everyone. This morning I wanted to discuss the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services Adult Protective Services program. So let's start with the purpose of the program. The purpose of Adult Protective Services is to provide investigations and protection to vulnerable adults ages 18 and older who are subject to being at risk of harm from abuse, neglect, or exploitation. The goals of the adult protective services, one is safety and stability. We would like to do that in the least intrusive and least restrictive way, all while having the adult to remain in the home or to thrive in place. Um, our goal is always to leave the situation better than when it was found, or better than how we found it. Next. Next, we have the definition of what a vulnerable adult is. So the APS statute, Public Act 519, began in 1982. This is located under the Social Welfare Act under Section Michigan Complied Laws, or MCL 400.11 A-F. So advanced age is not defined in the statute. The definition is somewhat subjective because disabilities do not equate to vulnerability. So how is the person unable to protect himself is what we ask when we're looking for that vulnerability. So if you're unable to protect yourself from abuse, harm, or exploitation, then we would view you as being vulnerable. It doesn't necessarily have to do with your age or a disability. Next. So for the next 4 or 5 slides, we're going to look at some of the definitions from the statute, and we're going to start with abuse first. So the definition for abuse is harm or threatened harm to an adult's health or welfare caused by another person. So physical abuse includes physical injury, it can be mental injury, it can be sexual abuse, and it can be a maltreatment. Next. Neglect. Neglect, harm to an adult's health or welfare caused by the inability of the adult to respond to a harmful situation. Next. And so per the definition listed for neglect, we have, or it could be neglect caused by the conduct of a person who assumes responsibility for a significant aspect of the adult's health or welfare, and then they fail to provide. So some of the things that can contribute to neglect due to failure to providing is food and clothing, shelter, medical care, assistant devices, personal hygiene, water, medication, a person's comfort, and your safety. Next slide, please. Also, there's a such thing as self-neglect. So self-neglect is when a person makes a choice to do or not to do something which could be beneficial or non-beneficial to the person's health or welfare. So living in subpar conditions. That's a personal choice to live in a particular situation. Persons may be not taking necessary medication or has ignored all medical advice. Um, the person's, they have a right to refuse medication, so maybe they've refused a medication that would be beneficial for them. Persons who would benefit from services, but they choose not to participate in services. So one thing, it's more difficult to assist a client or an adult if there's self-neglect and they're refusing services, because adults, unlike children, they do have, they can make that choice on whether or not they want those services. Next, exploitation. An action involving the misuse of an adult's funds, property, or personal dignity by another person. For example, financial exploitation. Um, Financial exploitation has increased over the last 15 years. Also, human trafficking. This is something that exploits a person's dignity. Next, thank you. Adult protective services. Some things that we do. We help vulnerable adults remain safe. We provide investigation services. We make referrals to other community partners. We purchase services and goods with APS funds. And with vulnerable adults, chosen support systems. And then we pursue legal intervention as needed. Some of the things that APS does not do: we do not remove anyone from their home. Um, we do not make people or force folks to work with APS. We do not accept, we do not make people accept services. We do not place persons or people in nursing homes. We do not release your private information. We do not, under no circumstances, ever release a referral source name. We do not investigate nursing home staff, and we do not investigate within prisons and state hospitals. Next. So capacity. The commonly used term in the community is competent or incompetent. Some people use competency and capacity interchangeably, as well as incompetent and incapacitated. APS is concerned with a person's capacity to make informed decisions and understand the consequences of decisions made. If APS concludes the person's capacity may be impaired, then APS must seek a medical professional's involvement to assess the client's capacity. The results of the medical professional assessment will provide guidance on the next steps APS will take. Here's where medical community plays an essential role with this. So if you're looking at the slide, we have like the probate court judge determines whether a person is an incapacitated individual. Probate court judges often reviews the medical professional assessment, and then the person with the capacity has the right to make poor choices or has the right to refuse any and all services if they have the correct mental capacity. APS referral, reporting requirement and protections. So there must be an oral report to centralized intake. And then we have immunity from civil service liability or good faith clause. And then referral source is always kept confidential. And then if you're a mandated reporter and you fail to report, there's a $500 fine for failure to report. So where to report an APS referral? As Catherine mentioned, I am the director of the Centralized Intake Unit. You can call my direct 855-444-3911 hotline number to report any abuse, neglect, or exploitation of an adult. This is a 24-hour number and we answer it 24 hours, 7 days a week. Next. What to report? So required information, we would need the name of the adult and the address where the adult is living, the description of the alleged abuse, neglect, or exploitation, the cause and manner of the abuse, neglect, or exploitation. Information, if available, that will be very helpful for us is the adult's age, the date of birth, and or the social security number. Any contact information of next of kin or any collateral contacts um, where others can collaborate or corroborate what's going on with the adult. Also, if there's others residing in the home, we would want to know that relationship and who's residing in the home. And of course, who the alleged perpetrator is of the abuse, neglect, or exploitation. Next, APS referral decision process. So there are two criteria required. Vulnerability while unable to protect him or herself, and then harm or threaten harm by abuse, neglect, or exploitation. So our decision path, you have to meet both criteria. So if it's a vulnerability and a harm, a referral is assigned and an acknowledgement letter is sent to the referral source acknowledging that we have accepted the case and assigned it for investigation. If there's only one criteria met, then the referral will be denied and the referral source will receive a denial letter which will indicate the reasons why we denied the actual investigation. Next. So for APS investigations, to determine, we have to determine the extent and the cause. We have to have the adult's capacity for self-care, management of personal and financial affairs, and willingness and capacity to use available resources and services. So our process, immediately if there's imminent danger. So we contact within 24 hours. So we try to go out to see them face to face within 24 to 72 hours. Adult or collateral contact who is not the referral source, we can't use them to, I guess, commence it, but we can use any other person to commence, and we can either commence in person or by phone. So we'll do a face-to-face with the actual victim or adult within 72 hours. And investigations normally take 30, but can take up to 90 days and possibly longer when there's court intervention. So the process, substantiate or not all allegations identified. Offer referrals for services for unmet needs. We do coordination of services. There's limited APS financial assistance. It's about $1,000 per fiscal year. And then for services, we'll do referrals to services for things like Meals on Wheels, transportation, home help or home health. Coordination, we'll do community resources, natural support, networks, and then any legal interventions that may be needed. So at this point, I want to pause to see if you guys have any questions before I continue into the final slide. Are there any questions with regards to Michigan Department of Health and Human Services Adult Protective Services Program?
We do have one question. This comes from one of our attendees. It asks, will the task force target those who abuse the elderly who are in the public trust, such as professional guardians, lawyers, judges, and other agencies? And
This is Catherine. I'll jump in on that one.
Yep.
It's not an APS question, so as the head of the task force, I will answer that question. It is beyond the scope of this symposium, but absolutely the task force will investigate any leads that we have relative to professional guardians, judges, lawyers, etc. So we can't always make those investigations, we can't make public at all, but when we bring in action, there's generally a press release on that.
Thank you, Catherine. The other question comes from a person named Commissioner Annie Holt, who is in the process of organizing a forum on the topic of human trafficking. What would human trafficking look like under the APS model?
Chantal, do you have anything on that?
So under the APS model, I'm going to let Cynthia answer that. I could probably answer for the CPS model, but for APS, to give that actual information, Cynthia, I'm going to defer to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chantal. For under the adults side, we don't have an official human trafficking protocol, but we do work with law enforcement, and we do get calls when they have encountered human trafficking, maybe with children, and they may find a vulnerable adult in the home as well. They would make an APS referral onto us.
Thank you, Cynthia. I also see another question in the Q&A. How do you investigate for over-medication of elders?
So I think that when we're talking investigation, we would start it, we would go into the home and we would speak with the adult, and we would gather, facts and information. We would also reach out to the medical provider who's providing those medications to see, how much medication has been prescribed and what their take on it is. Had they seen this adult? Had they been treating them? So it's a number of different ways that we would investigate that. But we would start with reaching out to care providers and the healthcare providers. Cynthia, please jump in if I missed anything.
Yeah, it would. We would talk with the client, and we probably would look at the medications prescribed, and then really talk with the medical provider who prescribed them, and then also determine who's administering the medication and their understanding of what's supposed to be administered and when. So we'd look into all of that, and try to determine what is going on, and go from there.
Thank you, Chantal and Cynthia. There's another question. If a bank representative determines an elder is a victim of a sweetheart scam and is wiring money overseas, should they report to APS? And then it goes on to say the banker may not know all of the details of their home situation or if their capacity is limited. I'm going to jump in on this one because it deals with the Financial Exploitation Prevention Act, which became effective just last September. So under the Financial Exploitation Prevention Act, bank and credit unions are mandated reporters. And if a bank employee believes that a customer is a victim of any scam, sweetheart scam, they are a mandated reporter. And that we have a presentation on that on our Elder Abuse Task Force website. Kristen Steindorf does an excellent presentation. And if anybody is interested in a presentation on the Financial Exploitation Prevention Act, you can reach out to that AG-PA email address and request a presentation. So, and by the way, the sweetheart scams, APS has told us that they're seeing an increase in reports of that scam, and Chad Canfield will talk about that a little later on.
And Catherine, this is Cynthia, and we would refer that on because it's dealing with wiring money overseas. So we would refer it on to probably more like the AG's office or so, to another entity that can investigate that, because that's not something, when it's going cross-border, states and go overseas, we would look to our partners to help investigate that.
Does anybody else see other questions in the chat that we should address? Otherwise, we're still a little ahead of schedule, but we can move on.
Catherine, there's a few questions that I see. Do you, let's see, there's a one that says, do you have a protocol to investigate for emotional/mental abuse?
I'll leave that to Cynthia and/or Chantal.
This is Cynthia. We would investigate. We do have staff and things that we're trained on working with the mental health community as well, and to do that investigation and address those issues. So we would work with our community partners and follow through on looking at what's occurring and establishing what may be occurring with emotional or abuse or mental abuse.
We also have another question that indicates, again, from one of the participants, in the event of a sexual assault exam needing to be done, is APS empowered or able to sign a medical consent for a vulnerable adult?
So I was going to go ahead.
I was on mute, sorry. I'm not sure if we're able to answer that question because we need to look more information. APS does not have jurisdiction to make medical consents for vulnerable adults. If there is a guardian or somebody else involved, they would have authority to do that. So we'd need to more particulars, I think, to give a full answer. But at this, my answer would be we don't have the jurisdiction to do that.
We have another question that says, or that asks, I should say, if there's evidence someone is being financially exploited and manipulated, but the victim is considered competent to manage their own affairs and finances, what is the recommended course of action?
So I was going to say, Cynthia, that's a good question. I would leave that one to you.
We would talk with that individual, and we would kind of understand what they're doing and why they are making the decisions that they are making, and if they understand the consequences of those decisions that they're making and how that money is being spent. And there'd be a whole discussion about if this money is, if all your money is gone, then what would you do, and have those discussions with them. And we probably provide them with resources for them as well. But if we've assessed that they have the capacity to make those decisions, then we have to honor them to make those decisions. But we would want to provide them resources and information about, what they're doing with their financial information and how they're handling it, so that they have information that they may not have had before we were involved in the situation.
Okay, thank you. How do you know, as APS, that there may be more than one doctor involved?
I'm not sure we're clear on the context of that question, Scott.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So here's another question, though. Does the APS investigate professional guardians and officers of the probate court if there is evidence they are abusing their power and abusing the elderly or people with disabilities?
If during an investigation, if we believe that there's something going on with that professional guardian or the probate court, we would work with the probate court and provide information. And there are other entities that do investigations of the guardians. But if we have concerns there, we would bring that to the court and ask for a review of that and their intervention at that point.
Okay, thank you. Another question, how is the adult approached by APS when a report is made? Do they just show up at their house?
Yes, we can show up. I would have, would depend on what the allegations were as to what is happening. So we want to make sure that the client is safe. We want to make sure that the worker is safe. So if there's any concerns about safety, we would make sure that that we may amends to do that. Sometimes that may be taking law enforcement with us, and or there might be that making a phone call ahead of time, but the majority of the time we make our initial contact to the client or collateral contact to obtain information about the client's risk and safety, and then we go from there. And the 72-hour visit face-to-face is normally done unannounced, so that we can make sure that we're there and seeing what is really occurring at the time to see whether the allegations that were said to us, we were able to determine whether that is truly going on or not. So the majority of the time the visit is, the face-to-face visit is made unannounced.
Thank you, Cynthia. There's a non-APS question that I'll handle. Can we join the Elder Abuse Task Force committees? Well, we appreciate the interest of these committees. We have over 100 people on the task force. You can provide input if you want. Take a look at the members of the task force, michigan.gov/elder abuse. Access the Elder Abuse Task Force page. It'll show you all the different entities that are members. So you can provide input through them, or you can provide input by sending an email to ag-pa@michigan.gov. Another comment that was made, although I don't see it in the Q&A anymore, it was a clarification between the words incapacity and incompetent, and the viewer suggested we kind of mix those together where they're really separate terms, and the viewer is absolutely correct. We're just acknowledging the fact that many people in the public use those terms interchangeably. Incapacity is something, for instance, if an individual has a urinary tract infection, for a little while they may be out of it and technically incapacitated, but that could wax and wane. Some people are just out of it in the morning, but if you catch them in the afternoon, they're great. So incapacity is something that can wax and wane. When a court determines somebody's incompetent, that is usually something that sticks. We were just trying to acknowledge for the learners today that many people use those terms interchangeably, albeit probably incorrectly using them interchangeably. We're talking about incapacity for the most part. There's another question I've heard from Ingham County that there's a shortage of guardians. So they aren't exploring that. I'm not sure what that is. I'm guessing it's guardian abuse, even if it's needed. What are we doing for people who are clearly not competent? Again, that's a misuse of competent. I think what they mean is people who are incapacitated in need of a guardian. The task force is looking at ways to increase the number of guardians out there and available. One way that we are looking at doing that is through education. Okay. So there is another question. What if a judge does nothing about a situation that involves wrongdoing by a guardian or conservator? That's something that once you've addressed it with the judge and you believe that the judge is clearly wrong, you can file something with the Judicial Tenure Commission. But there are no new questions, and the last few are kind of off the topic of APS. So let's get back to our presentation. Chantal, you can wrap it up, and thank you.
Okay, so Adult Protective Services. So our society must make it right and possible for older adults not to fear the young or to be deserted by them. For the test of civilization is the way that it cares for. For the test of a civilization is the way it cares for its helpless members. So with that said, again, I want to let you guys know that if you need to contact Adult Protective Services, you can use the toll-free hotline number, which is 855-444-3911. So this is the hotline number for abuse, neglect, and exploitation of adults and children. And when you're calling, I would advise that you let the phone operator know up front that you're calling about adult abuse or child abuse. Also, when you're on the hotline, it may ask you to choose a discipline. Press 1 for children's abuse and press 2 for APS abuse. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chantal. That was an excellent presentation, and thank you, Cynthia Farrell, for your additions and answering the questions and the moderators.